Yeah.
All right. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Grognards of Gaming. It's a podcast about role playing games between two utter geeks. I'm Phil, and with me, as always,
Rob the Grognard dog.
that sounds like a mid '80s wrestler, but yeah, that's pretty awesome, right? We should do another
It
podcast
does.
about wrestling. But I tell you what, I'm glad to have you, Grognard Dog, because couldn't do this without you. But today's episode is about our favorite systems. Any systems we've played, we have memorable thoughts of, but also, some systems we admired because it was elegant or the mechanics worked out good or maybe the setting was great. So I'm going to kick it off with a question to you, unless you have a question you want to kick it off to me.
Well, I just thought maybe we could do this like in that John Cusack movie with Jack Black. What was it? High Fidelity, where
High fidelity.
everything was top five. What's your top five? This, your top five that, your
Top
top five.
five.
So maybe we could do
Yeah.
top five.
All right. You want to start or shall I? You go ahead. Why don't you go ahead? I
All
think
right.
you've been thinking about this all day. If I know you, you already
You
have
know,
this queued like a good record.
you know me too well, my friend. Yeah. So
Yep.
all right. I'm gonna actually start with number one rather than do this David Letterman style and work
All
down
right.
to number one. I'm going to
Right.
start with number one.
Nice.
Uh,
Nice.
and I'm going to give a reason why each ranks the way it does, and you'll see why I'm doing it in this order. So
Cool.
my number one favorite gaming system, and also let me preface this by saying that this did take me all day to compile this list because I've never really been into the system of a role playing game. So
Okay.
so to come up with a list of even five was a chore for me. And the reason that is, Phil, is because you I'm sure you've heard of a game designer, an indie game designer by the name of Ron Edwards. And Ron Edwards, he created the Sorcerer role playing game, and he also created this online community for indie game designers and publishers called The Forge. But
Oh,
I
the
think that
Forge. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think one of the other reasons he's so well known, people might know his name, is because he came up with the GNS theory of role playing, and the GNS stands for gamist, narrative and simulationist. So he posited that people take, usually they lead with one of those three approaches. That's their preference, and then the other two to some lesser extent. And so gamism would be like treating the tabletop role playing game like a game. Like you start off with one kind of adversary, and then you later on work your way up to a harder adversary until you have this boss fight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the simulationist is like simulating a particular genre. We want to make sure we hit the tropes of the particular genre. And then the one in the middle is, I think, the one that is mostly me, which is narrative, and it's more like really trying to tell a story. So I think that if you are like me, if one is like me, and narrative is your style, gaming systems aren't really quite that important. So that said, my number one gaming system is, I think, Fate Core or Fate Accelerated, and it's because it, I think, is specifically geared towards the narrative approach to gaming.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so that comes in at number one. Also, it's super simple, and I think that it is designed for grognards like us who have full-time jobs, who have families, who don't have a lot of time for game prep, don't have a lot of time to stat out NPCs in a D20 system or whatever.
Right.
So it's designed so that you can just come right to the table with like a high concept for your character, maybe an aspect and a couple of skills, and that's it.
Right.
And you're ready to jump right in.
And you're ready to go. Yeah.
And the core rules literally tell you fill in the rest as you go. So that's why I like Fate Core the best. I think that my second favorite system. Should I go through them seriatim, or shall we popcorn back and forth? You want to?
Let's popcorn back and forth, because I got a couple of riffs off what you just said about Fate. Because I don't know that Fate's not my top one, but I'm gonna have to say it's number 3. And I'll tell you about my 1 and 2 a little later. There's a little suspense for you we'll put into the podcast tonight. And I got to figure out what 1 and 2 is. You could probably, knowing me, you probably will know which one. But at any rate, Fate's definitely, it can't go higher than 2 for reasons I'll divulge later on. But it is definitely my third. And it is entirely because of what you said and more. So absolutely the narrative side of it. I like that you mentioned that it's for grognards like us who've grown up, we have other responsibilities, and we don't always have a lot of time to pour into maybe something that's more of more of the simulationist kind of thing, or even more of the gaming where this preparation's a little bit more. It's an hour for hour. The hour preparation you get out is that you put in as an hour preparation of gaming. Fate's just like 10. I mean, you're right. It's like 30 seconds of prep for like 3 million hours of gaming, right? And I think that actually Fate kind of hacks another thing beyond the narrative, and that's this. A lot of times when my buddies and I, and this still happens to me, and I think it's happened to you too, we get psyched up about a game. It was actually part the game, but part the genre. In fact, I dare say it's actually more genre. So what you got is a lot of games out there would wrap itself like a snake coil around a genre. It could be a movie, like you have the Dune role-playing game, which, by the way, I have a high esteem for. It's not one of my top 5, but I have high esteem for it. Or you get like something that's okay. This role, I have one that I'm really intrigued about. It's called Vaesen, Vaesen, and what it is, it's specifically about Norwegian horror. That is horror in the Scandinavian countries, and it's so specific though, and it even has it has a much more formulaic way of how the story is going to go. So what that does is it coils itself around a very tight genre, so that if you're thrilled with the genre, you have a little bit more gas in your tank to deal with the game system, even if the game system isn't so great or the rules get in the way. But in the case of Fate, it's a total hack. You can play a game of Fate and you can come up with the wackiest genres, the craziest time periods, the weirdest melange of worlds and technologies and whatever you want. And it's a more almost organic way of riffing with your buddies, because who else but like us, Rob, would come up with a genre where we have different like D&D races transported into a 1980s rock band, genre, right? Who would think of that but us idiots? But Fate comes up with a silver platter and says, "Would you like a game system for that?" And we go, "Heck yeah, man!" So I think we should go one by one, because I wanted to say something about Fate. I knew that was your number one. I knew it, but you made it. For me, you made it from unknown to top 5 for me because of the experiences we've had. And for those people listening and watching, we have done online, during the shutdown pandemic, we have done like, by Zoom call, we've done entire games, and they not only worked, it was like they were wildly successful. We didn't even use something like Roll20 or anything like that online. We actually did just plain old guys, but by camera with pencil and paper. So definitely Fate. All right, so that's your number one. Let me share my number one. I'll give it back to you. I think you know what my number one is going to be, and it's going to be Ars Magica. So Ars Magica is number one of mine, and I think the last podcast I described how my friend Ed and I discovered it, and we took a long train ride, and we came back to the group, and we said, we've got to do this. So Ars Magica Second Edition had already wonderful memories for me, and if anybody out there is thinking about their favorite systems, we talked actually last podcast about some of our origin stories, and so you can't help but think about the confluence of the system with the time period of your own life when you role played it, and then what you were thinking and discovering as a younger person. You just cannot divorce it. So, right, I'm going to tell you, second edition of Ars Magica was a real like gelling time for my friends in Calvin. But imagine my delight when I moved to New York and I translate this wonderful experience into an even almost better experience, and we start playing Ars Magica Third Edition and Fourth Edition with the team, with the group in New York, and with some imported members from the Queens group, and even our friend Chris, who came from Jersey City to play. Now, here's the thing: how you know a system is successful. Maybe a system and a game. Maybe a system, the game, the team. We have a lot of spin-offs here. But you know it's successful when people will actually take the New Jersey PATH train to a subway, then get on a bus, then on a subway again, and 2 hours later they'll come for your game. If they're doing that, they probably like it, right? So Ars Magica is great. To pick apart a little bit of the system, just to say it for people who are listening or watching, Ars Magica did something, turned D&D or the D&D mentality on its head back in 1988, 1989, when it was first published by Lionel. And they're unapologetic about it. They go in and say, listen, you're used to this kind of like mindless hack and slash. And even if it's not mindless, and even if your GM has put a lot of work into why you're at the tavern and who you meet, even if there's a lot of character development, it still has every different character class at an equal level. You have highly regimented levels, right? You have experience points that get you up to levels. And it said, to heck with all of that. We actually want something where the story and the troop style role playing is king. And in fact, all other things are not as important as the story and the troop style role playing. You could even have people interrupting, going, I don't think that happens in the game, and that's actually allowed, right? In fact, I don't know of any system that had a beta GM. You were my beta GM in our New York group for a long time, and I don't know any system that would have that. Of course, you can do it with Fate nowadays, sure. But I'm saying back then I didn't know. So Ars Magica also throws things on its ear, because it says, well, no, you actually play two characters. You play a magus and a companion character, and the Grogs, which are sort of like the shared fighters that protect everybody. They're a soup. They're a bowl. You actually can dip your hand in, take a Grog out, play it for a bit, and put it back. It's a shared resource. But you have your wizard character, who's the most important and gets like the most points, and that's okay. Then you have a companion character that gives you some relief from playing the magus once in a while, and you could also say the magus gives you relief from your companion. But then you have another hidden character, shared character, a wonderful character that's shared between you, and it's called the Covenant. You actually get to stat it out, think about it as a troop, and it's actually your base of operations. I don't know any other system that ever did that at the time it did that, right? At the time and the way that it did that. So that's my number one. All right, Rob.
That's a great number one. Yeah,
What's
that's a great.
If Fate's
Well,
your number one,
Fate's my number one.
with your number two.
Yes. Well, before I go into my number two, I want to talk about Ars Magica. Sure. Ars Magica also made my top 5 list. And for all of the reasons you stated, I love the multiple characters, and I love the fact that the Covenant was itself its own character in a sense, like a Gestalt character. Yeah. But what I really loved about Ars Magica or Ars Magica, I guess is perhaps how. But I think Latin. I think it's Ars Magica, because I think the G is soft before an I. But anyway, what I really loved about it was that was the magic system. The magic system was the best magic system in any role playing game I have ever played. And what I loved about it was, you took the techniques and the forms. The Creo I create, Intelligo I understand, Muto I change, and so forth. And you took that and you mix it with what it was you were creating, mutating, or understanding. So it would be Corpus for the body, Aquam for the water, and so forth. And that was just fantastic. And I'm gonna circle back to that sort of combining of things when I talk about one of the other systems on my list. But that was just beautiful. But Ars Magica is number 5 of my 5 because of the combat. The combat system was, in my opinion, abominable, and it was even to the point where when we played 4th edition, you didn't even use the 4th edition combat system. You ported an older version or perhaps hacked it or something, and. Yeah, and I ran, and you were even a part of it. I ran for a Philly group, an Ars Magica game, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to buckle down, and for the first time in like 25 years, I'm going to actually learn the combat system. And I learned it, and it was complex, and I made a cheat sheet, and even with the cheat sheet, it was complex. And when we played it, it was super clunky. And I was like, that's what brings it down to 5. But despite all of that, it is still my top 5 because of all those other wonderful things about it. So I love Ars Magica. And also, don't sell yourself short. I think people were taking this train and that train and that train and that train to get to you every Sunday because you put together one hell of a game. I
appreciate that.
I would consider you a medievalist, and I think that
thank you.
I think that was what made, and of course Mythic Europe. What I mean, that's just a great setting.
You can't beat Mythic Europe.
I have
two of my good friends right now, because I think I mentioned I'm starting up an exemplary, kind of like a good old days Ars Magica Second Edition, and they're so into it. And I have a person that, and I'd forgotten this when I sold this to him, I had forgotten it. But of course, he's going to take a hook, line, sinker. He was trained as an archaeologist, so he already loves history, and so he is. You can tell he is getting so into the historical research, and that was like 2/3 of the fun, just starting up the game. But yeah. But I appreciate you saying that.
That's so great.
So Ars Magica's 5, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Good,
that's 5.
Good.
So just like I lifted Fate out of obscurity up to number 3 for you, you lifted Ars Magica up to number 5. Okay. So my number 2 is the Star Wars Saga Edition, and here's why. Okay. I've never been a big fan of the D20 system. I mean, I've been playing it since BECME, basic D&D, BECME, and it went through various incarnations. Wizards of the Coast gave it a whole rehaul, and they did a good job rehauling it. But I don't really think that the D20 system reached its peak until Star Wars Saga Edition, and then after, so Saga Edition was like, that came after D&D 3.5, I believe. It came between 3 or 3.5 and 4. And so it and they didn't even give it a number. They just called it Saga Edition. So I think it was at its peak. And I think that when they went from Saga Edition to D&D 4, that the D20 system started to decline in quality. So what I liked about Saga Edition, it was crunchy but well built. So it was crunchy without being clunky. And not only was it not clunky, it was actually elegant. It was really an elegant system. So and I think that I may well be one of the biggest Star Wars fans in the galaxy. So
biggest one I know. I'll be honest with you. You're a huge fan.
So that certainly helps.
Star Wars is to you as Tolkien is to me. So absolutely.
Yeah. So that's my 2.
Yeah, that's cool. So I have Star Wars on my list too, but not the Saga system. I have Star Wars D6, the old what is it, West End Games system. Mm-hmm. I have that as number 4.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Star Wars real quick then, because it's cool that we already have like at least 3 areas of confluence, different numbers, but it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should play the lotto with these numbers. But Star Wars D6 also is another example of a wonderful game system that I thought was heavy on the story, easy to narrate, but with real easy rolls. I think it really allowed the GM to not use too much brain energy on rules, like rules lawyering or rules like, I guess, resolution. I guess the resolution is the right word. And more on focusing on what was happening in the game, which is, I think, the intended idea. So I'm glad to hear the Saga system was better for you, and I might check that out based on your recommendation there, because I never had a chance to play for whatever reason. But the D6 was another example of a time in my life where I had, my buds. I was at college, and we had among our group a huge Star Wars fan. I think you eclipsed him, but he was pretty big. He would have been your Padawan, probably, I'm sure. We all were Star Wars fans, of course, but he knew a lot about it and was willing to GM us. So his name was Nate. I'll just give him a name. Nate GM'd Star Wars, and then he also GM'd Ars Magica until the second edition we got into, until like I kind of wanted to take it over, and I did a couple of games, and that's kind of that kind of like really started me down the Ars Magica track. But for a while, Nate was our GM for both games, and Nate had a really, and I think a lot of the GMing I think I've learned I've emulated from Nate, or some early seed pods of his, if you will. You know how stories should work and like dramatic moments, and like he would leave us on a cliffhanger, and we go no, and he go and scene. We're like no, that was really fun, and he gave us some times, but he would do it expertly in Star Wars D6. And one of the things I really enjoyed about Star Wars D6 was the skill system that, of course, was you could bump up by pips. It was +1, +2, and then the next guy up. And I liked the experience point system. I also liked being able to have flexibility over. I think the word is tactical. A lot of the tactical stuff that would happen between characters. Where I think the D6 system fell down is when they started to have to think about different scales, like speeder scale. They had like ship scale, capital ships, and where they started to kind of get clunky is when you wanted to do like a fighter battle or a space battle, which of course you want to put in. Then it started getting a little bit clunky. But I remember for character action, I just thought Star Wars D6 was awesome. So yeah,
Okay,
that's cool.
that's good. And I remember Nate. I met Nate.
Yeah, you met.
And,
I think you met Nate. That's right.
and played Star Wars D6 with you and him. And
you probably did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know, by the way, as a side note, I still get ribbing to this day. I still get gentle, teasing to this day about me allowing you to play. I think you remember his name, the former Stormtrooper, Yaravian Estrabula. If you remember him.
I do.
Remember Yara Estrabula?
Yara Estrabula.
Everyone thought that you were my buddy, and I was going to give you all these favors, and the favors were in the form of extra points and Star Wars, and they thought I let you go nuts, and I was like, no, this is actually a character he's actually like built up over time, and they thought you were my ringer, and I get jokes from Dave all the time, still to this day. He's like, "You gonna give me a lot of points like that one stormtrooper?" I'm like, dude, that was like 20 years ago. Like, he's still pissed, like in a funny way. It's hilarious.
Aww.
But I eventually let you know. But because like Yara Strabula had like a 70 blaster or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, did he? Oh, that's funny.
So yeah, he was pretty badass. All right, so so we covered Ars Magica, Fate, and a couple of different Star Wars systems.
Yes.
What else, Rob? Is on what's next on your list?
All right. So number 3 on my list is the White Wolf storyteller system, and this started off with World of Darkness, vampire, werewolf, mage, and then went on to wraith, and then changeling and hunter. But what I really enjoyed was the version of it, the pulp heroes version of the storyteller system, which was a game called it was White Wolf's Adventure. Had an exclamation point at the end.
Wow.
Adventure. And Adventure was awesome because it was pulp, and we're gonna maybe do our top 5 favorite genres next.
Yes.
And spoiler alert, pulp is in there for me, baby.
Right,
so
pulp's in there for you, big time. I know it is. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So Adventure, I thought, was a really, really good system for pulp.
Yeah.
And what I liked about it, okay, I promised I was going to circle back to the 2-part, the Creo Ignum, the technique and form and the magic system of Ars Magica. Well, I think, and Jonathan Reinhardt Stegen, whatever his name was. Yeah, Reinhagen. Right. And Jonathan Tweed, I think they came from, if I'm not mistaken, the White Wolf people, and then they broke off or something. Is that right? And
no. What happened is that White Wolf had bought Ars Magica, and then the White Wolf put out the 3rd edition. Yeah, I don't know that they were employed by White Wolf. I could be totally wrong. Maybe they were. I don't know. Well, then they had formed Lion Rampant in the 1980s. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't think it's a coincidence that Ars Magica used that. Take something from this part of your character sheet, and take something from that part of your character sheet, and combine them to have a numerical pool that you add to your dice. because White Wolf did that with all of those systems that I talked about. They did that. What they
Okay.
did was you would mix an attribute with an ability. So an attribute was like
Okay.
a physical, social, or mental attribute. You take that dice pool. So you had a couple of dots in those things. You would take like those whatever 2 or 3 dots,
Mm-hmm.
and you would mix that with your abilities, your skill, or your knowledge. And you had a couple of dots in those. And so if you had two and the dots up here in your attribute, you had 3 dots in your ability. You would mix them, and you'd have 5. You'd have a total of 5, and that was how many dice you rolled, how many d10s you rolled, 5 d10s. And I liked that a lot. And I'll never forget. You never met these friends of mine. Her name is Beth, and Beth is one of the players in the Fate game that I'm running now. But Beth and I have been gaming together for decades, and we were in a White Wolf game that sort of the player characters could be from any of the monster books. You could be a vampire, you could be a mage, whatever. And I forget exactly what she played, whether it was a changeling or a mage or something. But whatever she was, she played like a really like beautiful, sexy like reporter or something. And we had a GM. His name is Kai, and Kai is one of the best GMs I ever had, and he was hilarious. And so I remember her character was like was trying to distract the antagonist by like running towards him and letting her buxom self like kind of just. And so Kai says, all right, give me give me a manipulation plus athletics roll or something like that. And we all just fell on the floor laughing, because this was like an attribute and an ability that you would never mix together, nor could you even conceive of a situation where you would mix these together. But this situation seemed to present that, and that was so much fun. So I really thought that was a clever
That's
way of
cool.
doing it. Yeah.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. That's my number 3.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah. I think I know what your number 4 is, but it's my turn. So I'm going to get to you in a minute.
Okay. That's
all
fine.
right. Well, so let me ask you a question. There's something I said earlier in today's session. I bet you can, because you know me, you can guess my number 2. You
So
may
much
not know
pressure.
it by name, but you know the genre. If Ars Magica is first and Fate's third, you know where I'm gonna. You know how I have to dedicate my number 2 slot.
Yep. So your number 2 is, and I actually the name of the game and company that makes the game is on the tip of my tongue, but it's not coming to me at the moment. But it's definitely that Lord of the Rings. It begins with an M. What's the company begins with an M?
It's you're thinking of Iron Crown Enterprises actually.
Okay.
But it's Middle Earth role playing.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's
Were you
where the
thinking
M.
of the One Ring or something else?
No,
No.
no. It was definitely that older Lord of the Rings system.
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Middle Earth Role Playing, or M.E.R.P.
M.E.R.P. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
That was the M.
M.E.R.P. is the acronym for Middle Earth Role
Middle
Playing.
Earth Role Playing.
That's right. But Iron Crown Enterprises was the original publisher, and that was also late 80s, 1987 or 8, something like that. And then in the early 90s they did kind of a collector's edition. And anyway, so Middle Earth Role Playing, was really the first role playing my first role playing game that I did seriously and never looked back. Some people, and we in an earlier session we talked about our origin stories, and I told you about how some of my D&D books were on the shelf for a while, and I did get into basic D&D, basic and expert, and then I looked at my advanced D&D. Again, I think I told you the story about how my older brother didn't know kind of what he was buying, so he just got a bunch of D&D books, and I didn't know they didn't go together. One was kind of written a little bit higher, grade level than I was at, and whatever. So I did mess around with D&D, but I never took a role-playing game. The first role-playing, I should say this, you kind of remember your first album, right? You remember your first album. Mine was Paradise Theater by Styx, by the way.
Oh.
I think I want to say yours is one of Genesis or Kansas, one of those two.
Kansas, you got it. It was Point of No Return by Kansas.
Yeah, I knew it was. Right. So you never forget your first album. You never forget your first role-playing game. And this is one that absolutely stuck with me throughout the years, even until this day. I actually like introduced M.E.R.P. as a one shot to my buddies like last Last year, early last year. So I was like, "Yo, dudes!" But we actually have been playing the One Ring system, which, by the way, is not bad. I do like it,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
it actually hasn't made my top 5. And now, as we've been talking, my top 7, because I actually wrote a couple of other ideas in
Cool.
case we have time.
Honorable mentions.
If we don't get to it, we don't get to it. But that's
Okay,
fine.
that's fine.
Yeah. So honorable mentions. There you go. So think about that. Anyway, so
All right.
M.E.R.P, Middle Earth role playing is the one that it's gotten a lot of criticism, and I can see why. It was kind of a cousin or maybe a child of the Roll Master system, which is ICE's. When you opened up the podcast today with the game, the narrative, and the simulation type role playing games, Roll Master was an attempt to simulate like every aspect of high fantasy, but it's not story. It's roll on a table. In fact, you have to find a table to find a table to roll on a table. And then you got to, have permission from the company to roll on a 4th table. It's really crazy. I mean, it's rules heavy, but it's for people who really, really like that, because at some point the rules can do some things for you that maybe you didn't think of or something. I don't know. I don't think, Rob, I think you and I generally rejected rules, and so did Nate, because anything that got underfoot of the story, we tend to reject. This is again why Fate's your number 1 and my number 3. But M.E.R.P, I found that because I loved the J.R.R. Tolkien's world so much, you know how big of a Tolkien fan I am, and because I loved it so much, I didn't really mind the armor that I would wear, the heavy armor of the tables, and the chainmail of the super complex combat system, the crazy man. I took all that on because I was like, no, man, like this is the game for Middle Earth. The thing about the Middle Earth role-playing system, you can say maybe you didn't like the clunky and rules-heavy mechanics. You can say that. But what you can't say anything negative against is the work that Coleman Charlton and Pete Fenlon put in as college kids when they first decided to design this game, in simulating a world that's Middle Earth, that's so close to what you think Tolkien would have wanted, as to render the things that they created indistinguishable from actual Tolkien. There are many times I've been confused and told a story about something in Tolkien's world, and somebody goes, "Was that actually in the books?" I'm like, "No, I got it from Middle Earth, but it really sounded good because it interlocked so well with what he did write that you're like, oh my gosh, it's like really real." So I think for me, Middle Earth became real enough, and the realistic had become in my mind through M.E.R.P, is what I think. So that made my number 2. I had to make Tolkien 1 or 2, and because Ars Magica was there, I had to make it my number 2.
Yeah, let me just jump in before we move on, and I'll say what I want to say something very loving about M.E.R.P. I found exactly what you ended with to be a great appeal of the supplements that M.E.R.P put out. They gave a name to every single one of the Witch Kings. They gave a backstory. Yes. It was amazing. And but what I loved was I used the Fate system to run a Lord of the Rings game for some players, and I borrowed M.E.R.P supplements on
you did.
On the Far Harad, right, which is like their Middle East or something. And then Tolkien also mentions but doesn't develop an African-like continent. It also begins with an H.
Ardor. Yeah.
Ardor. Okay.
Well, actually, you're thinking of Harad. Harad would be the Southlands. Yep.
Oh, Harad was the Southlands, and then the Middle East.
But then there's a continent even south of that called Ardor. Ardor.
Okay.
But it wasn't. That was also very not canon. But anyway,
I'm thinking of something like High and Mar or something like that. But whatever they're called, M.E.R.P put out a source book for each of these regions, and I think that there was a Far Harad and a Near Harad. So there were actually 3 source books, and it just completely developed the lands around Middle Earth, and I just thought that was wonderful. And you could tell that the material, even though it wasn't officially canon, it was developed by people who so loved the Tolkien legendarium that you could be sure that no matter how much research you did personally, you would never produce
That's
a
right.
product as close to the original as what they did, and
That's
that's what I
right.
love about it. So, all right,
That's
so
right.
good for great for M.E.R.P. All right, so there's only I've already said that one for me is Fate Core, and also maybe Fate Accelerated shares the slot with that because it depends on the genre which one I'll use. Number two for me is Star Wars Saga. I said number three was the Storyteller System for World of
I think
Darkness,
I know your four.
and I said that number five was Ars Magica. So
Yep.
before I say what my number four is, I'm curious to know what you think my number four is.
Star Frontiers.
Wow. So no,
No.
I know. Star
Was
Frontiers
it is Star Frontiers
is
6? Is it among the honorable mentions?
yeah, Star Frontiers is
All
an
right.
honorable mention for me,
All
but
right.
only because of the nostalgia factor.
Okay.
I did not find the original percentile system to be a
Yeah.
particularly interesting system,
I
and
agree.
I did not find the Zebulon's Guide revamp to be a particularly
I
good system.
agree.
I thought they were both clunky, and I
Yep.
didn't like the systems. I only played them because at the time it was really the only sci-fi game out there, and I
Right.
loved sci-fi.
Right.
No, so for me, number four is probably going to be a surprise to you. I'm not, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of the D20 systems, although Star Wars Saga Edition does break that rule. But I
Mhm.
did like D20 Modern, and that was put out by Wizards of the Coast
Oh.
like around the turn of the 21st century. And they
Yeah.
also then subsequently put out a D20 Past and a D20 Future.
Okay.
But it was the same essential system as D20 Modern. I liked it because it was. I loved the idea of talent trees. Like you could pick a talent tree, and then you could start, developing your talent
Yeah.
tree, sinking deeper into it,
Oh yeah.
or picking from different talent trees and being sort of a jack of all trades. So that was kind of neat. And I don't think the D20 Modern was the first system to use a talent tree like system, but it was the first one, as far as I know, that gave it the name talent tree, which in my mind solidified. I was able to conceptualize. Okay, it's a talent tree I see, and I was able to
Mhm.
understand it better, and that kind of put it all together. And also,
Mhm.
it came up with the different archetypes. Because it was like a general all purpose system. You had a hero based on each of the old. Like each of the old Dungeons and Dragons abilities. So you had the strong hero, the intelligent hero, the wise hero, the charismatic hero, and I thought that was really cool. So
That's
um,
cool.
I thought
Yeah.
it was nice and clean for a D20 system. It was nice and clean, and
Yeah.
it was easy to conceive of. So that's my number four.
It sounds interesting. That sounds interesting with the character archetypes there you've got. I think that's pretty attractive. And the talent tree idea is really interesting. You right when you said the talent tree, my mind instantly leapt to the simplest expression of that was in Ars Magica, where you had to write a specialty in parentheses, and you get a +1. And what's fun about it is when you have to think of a specialty for like concentration, or I don't know, like Wizards Dueling, which is called Pertamen, or you come up with a specialty for shipbuilding, and you're like, oh well, I guess my character. So you kind of start thinking about honing a talent that way. But I think the talent tree idea in D20 Modern sounds really cool, actually. And then modern would be modern genre. I never played it, but it would be modern genres or like
That's right.
okay,
Yeah. So it was designed to tell like cop stories in the 20th century.
yeah.
I used it to play a 1970s action hero story, and one guy played like a Shaft like character. One guy played like a
Sweet.
Robert Blake did a show called Helltown. It lasted one series where he played a priest who was like a tough guy in a rough neighborhood. And so one of my players played a guy like that. Another guy played like
That's awesome.
a bicycle karate kid. They were
That's
great.
awesome.
They were great characters, and it was a great 70s. Like, and I called it D20
Yeah.
mod. I called it the
Mod.
mods.
Okay, that's cool.
But
Mod,
yeah,
of course,
it's just
mod,
stuff like
mod.
that.
That's
All
perfect.
right.
That's perfect. That's
All right. So
perfect.
what's your last one? I'm dying to know. You said
Yeah,
I
I
would.
don't.
Oh no, you said I would know M.E.R.P. Okay. So what's your
Number
last?
two, yeah, yeah. This one you probably won't know unless you have read the Roger Zelazny books, Nine Princes of Amber.
I have not.
And I'm saying that now. I'm thinking. I actually I'm looking over at my phone, and I actually have it on my Audible to kind of finish because I thought, I'm going to go back through it, and I will tell you, I'm not a huge reader. I know, but I'm not. Even though I love Tolkien and all that, I'm more of a listener, and that's just the way that my brain processes information. I think it's auditory. I'm visual and auditory. I don't know that I'm really a reader, right? So, but I remember when I was in college, this is like I was in college, and it was a little later in college. It was like, I want to say maybe junior or senior year. I got somebody recommended me the books. I'm like, all right, I'll try them. And then like I couldn't put them down. And so to my delight, someone had written a role playing game called Amber. And
Yes.
Amber was from Phage Press, and Amber is a diceless role playing game. And so that was another mold breaker. Up until now, you'd need a dice to resolve. Of course, you need a dice. Like how would you not play a role playing game? That was a thing you didn't think of. Like, how dare you? Well, Amber had postulated that if you have 4 different skills, and it was very simple. That's another thing. It was elegant and simple, and it got you right into the world. So I think thinking about our systems and what we've said here tonight, I think you and I both agree, like anything that just gets you going right away, gets you right into the world with a minimum of stuff, just go right in, is our favorite. Shoot you right in, like Fate will do, right? And Fate,
Yeah.
and even Fate's lighter version is written for that too. Anyway, so Amber kind of got you there, but you did a bidding system with other players to determine your rank. That's how you know who was better than others. But, and here's the big but, you could always role play yourself out of that. So if you were third rank in, let's say, Warfare, and somebody was second rank, would be better than you would lose your battle every time. And you'd have to have a narrative, and your GM would supply a narrative that would explain it. Unless your endurance was one rank over his. Then all you had to do was tire him out, and you'd win the battle. So even then, there was some. What it did was it would shift the responsibility for narrative onto the players to explain, even in despite a situation, how would that work out? So it provided flexibility, and you realized, oh my gosh, I never rolled the dice. All we're doing is just talking and rationalizing why one thing would not happen, and that was a resolution. So I
Yeah.
thought that was really cool, but it was another one that's like coiled around its genre kind of thing, where you got to read the books, you got to love the book. You don't have to, but you're gonna, if you read the books, you're like, whoa, this stuff is really good. And the folks that wrote Amber just like the folks who wrote M.E.R.P, did a wonderful study of Rogers Leslie's books, and they really come to life through the role playing game. Yeah,
All right. So
So
let's
that's
just
my
now.
number 5.
That's
Yeah,
your 5. So let's just mention our honorable mentions without really
sure. You go
discussing.
ahead.
So for me,
Yeah,
it's Star Frontiers. That's really the only one.
yeah.
What are your honorable mentions?
So Star Frontiers was absolutely one of my 2 honorable mentions, but I wanted to throw in, and let's just actually talk about Star Frontiers real quick, because you
Okay.
said a little bit about it earlier in the session, but I did want to
Fair
say a
enough.
couple of things.
Fair
I
enough.
came to Star Frontiers for Dralasites with Sonic Disruptors. There you go. I had that. I just need to say that.
Yeah, they're awesome.
No, Star Frontiers was another thing where it was TSR game, and I think they did do a good job of not making it as overly developed as D&D. I think they did a good job. But I agree with you. The percentage system really didn't quite work. But that was a system where I really enjoyed their expression of the sci-fi. It was not Star Wars. It was not
Yeah.
Star Trek. It was more like a lesser known fantasy writer, like a sci-fi writer, would have been proud to put out Yazirians, the Vrusk, the Sathar, the Dralasites. That's really cool. They had, I will say this, they had a really great like star system map.
Yes.
And when it came to ship-to-ship combat, they actually later on they had a series of supplements on ship-to-ship battle. That was
Nighthawks.
cool.
Nighthawks.
Nighthawks, yeah,
Yeah.
that was cool.
That was.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know that it worked out so tactically. Whereas Star Wars D6 worked out tactically in character. But I thought, like, when it got, so it would be kind of cool to get those two to
Yes.
peanut butter and chocolate there. This is. But the other one on my special mention, and I feel that I have to mention it, but it's going to be weird. It's the only role playing game I fell in love with, but actually never played. I've never played a session of it, and it's King Arthur's Pendragon system.
Mm.
There's and it's really great. And I have the Knights Adventurous expansion to Pendragon. Pendragon for me was less of a role playing game as it was a source book for all things Arthurian. And I end up reading Le Morte d'Arthur and like a couple of other books, and like looking into the Merlin legends. I ended up really falling in love with Arthurian legends from the lens of Pendragon.
Mm-hmm.
But I always wanted to. The reason why I never played was because I was too busy falling in love and spending my time with other things, like Ars Magica and Middle Earth at the time. So but had I ever played Pendragon, I would have liked a couple of features. One feature is there's a check system where if your character does a thing or exhibits a behavior, they get a check. And checks can be personalities. Now you remember from Ars Magica we had personality traits. They could
Yeah.
-3, +3, and a GM could go, well, you have to roll your loyalty because you're being asked to do something that's kind of against your personal code. And if you had a grog with a -2 loyalty, they'll go, screw you, I'm going to go drink, and I don't care what the wizards say, right? And the personality roll would assist you in figuring out what that character would probably do. You and I never made it like you had to do it this way. We never wanted to help straitjacket somebody into a particular way of role playing. So we never took personality traits too seriously. In Pendragon, you have a set of traits, but the cool thing is when your character does a thing, you get a check in that, and then you're allowed to put experience points in later. So what it does is it makes like a system where your character, you as a player are mindful of wanting to role play like that to get the permission to later put points in. I always thought that was kind of a really cool idea.
Yeah.
But I think it was mostly about the world for me and not necessarily about the game. But who knows?
Yeah.
Someday I may dust the thing off and go, hey guys, you want to do one set of meeting Merlin on Isle of Avalon and getting the quests? So
Yeah. Count me in if you do that.
Yeah, man.
So that's awesome. Yeah. That these are great top fives for both of us, and I invite any listeners or viewers to if there's a comment section below, depending on where we post this, I invite you to tell us what your top 5 role playing systems are. Be interested to know what they are and why.
That.
Yeah.
I'd love
so that was so much fun, Phil. Thanks,
great,
and
man.
and I think maybe next time we'll do top 5 settings. Yeah.
Yeah, settings and genres, and I think we
Settings and
already
genres.
touched on it a little bit in this session, but now my brain's going toward that, and so I'm going to really enjoy talking to you about that. But we will see you next time on the podcast, man, on Grognards of Gaming. Woo! All right, talk to you soon. All right.